Dr. Aruna. I am Professor and HOD of Biochemistry at Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health, Bangalore. I am also a clinical geneticist and a metabolic physician. Today we will be discussing on genomic imprinting disorders. The speaker is Dr. Gayatri Rangarajan Iyer. She has done MSc in Applied Genetics from Bangalore University, PG certificate course from Kamineni Hospital, Hyderabad, PhD from Kamineni Hospitals, Osmania University, and she has also done genetic counseling level 2 course from the Board of Genetic Counseling. She has published many papers in both national and international journals. Today she will be discussing on genomic imprinting. Over to you, Gayatri.
Thank you, Dr. Aruna, for the kind introduction, and thank you, ORDI, for this opportunity. I'll share my screen quickly. Please confirm if you are able to see my screen.
Yeah, ma'am. It's visible.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. Today we'll be discussing about genomic imprinting disorders. They are the under-recognized even among the rare disorders. So, to begin with, what is genomic imprinting? So, imprinting refers to epigenetic modifications that result in monoallelic expression. So we have 25,000 genes in our body, and most of the genes are in copies of 2 except for X and Y. So we assume that all the autosomal genes are equally expressed, but that is not the case. There are certain genes in our body which are exclusively expressed either from the father or from the mother, and this is called as genomic imprinting. There are 200 such genes. And how does this happen? This happens with the help of DNA methylation. So when one particular gene is supposed to express itself, there is lack of methylation. And one gene has to express itself, it will have methylation. When it has to silence itself, there will be methylation marks around it. So the methylations happens in the cytosine, like you can see here, and it becomes methyl cytosine, which will suppress the expression, and so that only a single gene expression is happening. So that means we have only one active copy for 200 genes in our body. Anything goes wrong with that, then we would see that whatever function it was carrying out, the protein was carrying out, that is not happening, and the associated disorders arise. Though they are single gene at times, they do not follow Mendelian laws of inheritance. They are non-Mendelian in nature, and so far 13 to 14 imprinting disorders are known. Of the major 4 are Prader-Willi, Angelman, Beckwith, and Silver-Russell syndrome, and today we'll be discussing them at depth. The first region of our interest is chromosome 15q11-13 region. So, like all the chromosomes, all the autosomal chromosomes, we have 2 copies, maternal and paternal. P is paternal, M is maternal, and color coding is also here. In maternal, what happens is certain regions is exclusively expressed, like the ones in blue color here. And in the mother, only this particular region is expressed. These regions are not expressed, you can see. The switch lies in this star, the yellow star that is there. The switch is on in the maternal and it's off in paternal. That is what is determining what gets expressed in which chromosome and in which order. Anything goes wrong with the paternal copy, we see a condition called as Prader-Willi syndrome. Here, the child has mild to moderate intellectual disability, has obesity, has Guradil issues, and you could see behavioral tantrums. Those things are there. Now, the same something goes wrong with the maternal copy. Same region, if the maternal gets deleted, you see an opposite condition called as Angelman syndrome. Here, the child could have severe intellectual disability, could be autistic, can have microcephaly, that is small head, won't be able to speak properly, they will have balance issues, their teeth will be widely spaced, so many different issues. So same region, depending the deletion came from which position, you could see 2 different conditions. So talking in depth about Prader-Willi syndrome. So Prader-Willi syndrome, like I said, it's in the chromosome 15q region. There are 3 reasons why it could happen. It could be because of deletion in the paternal region. A small region is deleted. That is why those genes are not available to do its activity. It could be because of maternal uniparental disomy. By chance, both the chromosome 15 came from the mother. So this happens in cases of non-disjunction where there was a trisomy and the body wanted, or like there was a rescue happening in the embryo so that the gestation could go forward. Or it could also happen in monosomy rescue. Some reason, because of some reason, both the chromosome 15 are from the mother, and that is why this has happened. So this happens in about 20 to 25% of Prader-Willi cases. Deletion is a major one in 70 to 75 that happens. Last is imprinting defect. Overall, everything looks fine, except for in this particular region, it behaves like the maternal copy. Eventually, what you see is you don't have the gene and the expression is stopped. There is a clinical scoring when all you could suspect of Prader-Willi syndrome. To simplify, we could go stepwise. One, at birth, you would see the child has severe hypotonia. Muscle is floppy, in fact, is what they say. The muscle is little loose. They could have feeding issues where they're not able to suck the milk properly and they need feeding support. But as they cross 1 year or so, they become hyperphagic. They have food obsession. Eventually, that leads to excessive weight gain and towards obesity. They have distinctive facial features. They can have almond shaped eyes. Their nose is little different. The way the cheeks also appear little different. They could have strabismus, that is squint eye, can also be there in them. And hypogonadism, it's a male child. Mostly they will also have undescended testes for which they need correction and evaluation. The minor symptoms include there would be decreased fetal movement. There can be stubbornness. They could be extremely set in their ways. They do not like or adjust to changes very easily. They have problems with nighttime sleepiness because they have sleep apnea, which leads to excessive daytime sleepiness also. You would also see many of them have breathing issues at sleep. So that is one of the symptom. Short stature as compared to other siblings or other relatives in the family, they would be short. There could be hypopigmentation. They would be little on the fairer side as compared to other family members. So these are the symptoms. If you see, it could prompt a diagnosis for Prader-Willi syndrome. So, like I said, there are clinical ways in which one could identify Prader-Willi syndrome during the assessment. Like when they come for the diagnosis, ultrasound for undescended testes is done. Endocrine profile is tested. If there is a scoliosis, then X-ray has to be done. And for strabismus, optal consultation is sought. Coming at the genetic level, we have to do methylation-based test. That is the first line test. So there is MSPCR, which is small methylation-specific polymerase chain reaction, and MSMLPA, the multiplex ligation probe-based amplification. So these are the two techniques that has to be the first line test for this particular condition. Chromosomal microarray and FISH can also help you with diagnosis, but the problem lies it will tell you there is a deletion in chromosome 15, but it will not tell you has it come from the mother or father. So again, clinical correlation is what will help you to come to reach the diagnosis. It's not accurate if you go with CMA or FISH. Coming to the management aspects, majority of imprinting disorders, it's only symptom-based management. There is no curative treatment that is there, but there are certain therapies which are available. So the basic is, first is we have to maintain the calorie intake. Obesity has to be maintained. There is a high risk of them going towards a hypothyroidism or diabetes. So that has to be monitored. Surveillance has to be there for that. Bone density has to be checked. Sleep studies have to be done because there is a risk for sleep apnea. Scoliosis has to be monitored. Usually, they become hyperphagic after 2 years of life. So that has to be very much monitored very closely. And they also become aggressive. They're also very emotional by nature. So all of that requires a lot of behavioral management as well. So since they have mild to moderate intellectual disability, they might need special education as well. And specific, there is growth hormone therapy, which is seen to have proven there is we can see there is betterment in certain symptoms with the help of growth hormone therapy, like height weight ratio, the balance improves with that. Also in the behavioral changes people are seeing when the child is given growth hormone therapy, so that usually starts after 6 7 months. And because of the efforts of the Indian Prader-Willi Syndrome Association and parent groups, it is also included in the national rare disorder policy. So if they have problem with sucking and all, they might require assistance in the feeding in the early time. And usually Prader-Willi syndrome, they have little adverse drug reactions to drugs, so they are not prescribed with medications very easily, though they need it for mood stabilization and seizures at certain cases. So we have to be careful in seeing what type of medicines actually suit them. So, talking about globally for hyperphagia, there is an FDA approved drug called as Vycat, that is from Celeno Therapeutics in 2025, that was approved, and it is used for children 4 years and above. Coming to the next disorder, which is the Angelman syndrome. Angelman syndrome is again the same as the chromosome 15q11 to 13 region, but here it is the maternal involvement that is there. If there is a maternal deletion, or if there is paternal uniparental disomy, both chromosome 15 by chance came from the father, then also it can lead to Angelman syndrome. Or it could be imprinting defect. In addition to that, 10% of cases have UB3A sequence variants. So there could be mutations, sequence variants in the UBE3A gene. So in 10% of cases, this could also happen. 80% of the times you can detect with the help of MSPCR, MSMLPA. For 10% of cases, you will require sequencing, and the other 10 are still idiopathic. That means there could be other conditions which are similar to Angelman, or certain genetic factors still not known which is associated with this particular condition. So there are clinical features. There is no one standard scale for to identify Angelman, but the common features that we see is, one is they have a big grin, microcephaly, that is the small head, deep set eyes could be there, wide mouth, open, often open protrusion in the tongue can be seen. Then they could have jerky movements and ataxic gaits. So often they will find it difficult to have a balance when they are walking. So that could be a reason. When you see moderate to severe intellectual disability in a child, autistic behavior, and they are not able to balance themselves properly, it should prompt the diagnosis for Angelman syndrome. They are also at risk of developing scoliosis. Then they have hand flapping behavior. For no reasons, they could flap or clap without any reason, and they are also usually very happy by Demeter. So they're very happy even without reason, they could laugh to themselves. So these are subtle signs that could prompt towards Angelman disorder. They have seizures, and irritability is there, jerky movements are there, and also in them hypopigmentation as compared to the rest of the family, and they could also have blue colored eyes. And in contrast to Prader-Willi, where we see nighttime sleepiness is little problem in Prader-Willi, but they have excessive daytime sleepiness. But in Angelman, there is majorly insomnia that is there. So you could see same region, but stark differences in the phenotype. Yeah. So talking about the clinical and the genetic diagnosis, so they can come for evaluation for microcephaly, for intellectual disability where there is developmental delay, or for ataxia, tremors, or they could have motor behavior, seizures, or abnormal EEG. These are when they could come into diagnosis, or they can come under clinical, like they can come towards diagnosis. Genetic assessment, the first, like I said, it's MSPCR or MSMLPA. 80% of the cases you'll be able to diagnose with the help of these two. Fish or CMA can be done, but again, it won't be able to tell you whether it's maternal or paternal. Again, you would require a methylation based test to do the confirmation. And 10% of them could have a UB3A sequence variant. Coming to the management part of it, there are again, there is no particular treatment that is available. It's all symptom based management. For scoliosis, growth and neurodevelopment, proper surveillance has to be done. MRI and EEG is taken because most of them have seizures or at risk of seizures. So that is why baseline EEG is usually done for them. Physiotherapy and orthopedic evaluation is required for ataxic gait. Speech impairment is usually seen in Angelman syndrome, and if we don't start the speech therapy early enough, they might they won't be able to speak. So it's very important, as early as first year of life we are taking them towards speech therapy, and so that at least some aspects of communication and language is reserved and they are able to develop. Most children, because we miss the window, maybe that is why also most children are not able to speak or express themselves properly. Special education is required, so ocular consultation is required. Then if there are any particular orthopedic issues, then surgery for that would be required. and anti-epileptic therapy is required, but it's important that we see the GABA levels also, because it's contraindicated in children with Angelman, because this region also have several of the GABA genes are also present in this 15q region. So it's important. It's the prescription happens very carefully. For hyperactive behavior also medications are usually given. So there is an Indian Angelman Foundation. Though Angelman is not correctly included into the National Rare Disorder Policy, but with the efforts of ORDI, Angelman and all, there is recognition for this disorder, but yet any patient is yet to avail any advantage of this. But the recognition has still, we have got the recognition of a rare disorder. Talking about globally, so Ionis is a company which has developed an antisense oligonucleotide. So there, the idea there is they could activate the paternal chromosome 15 UB3A gene so that some symptoms of Angelman is elevated. So they have got some, so they have got some a good response in the phase 1 and 2, and currently they have entered the phase 3 trial. INS 582, so they are trying for both 40 and 80 mg by intrathecal injection. It is still at the clinical trial level. It has reached phase 3. It's not available out there for us to buy, but this recent development is there in this domain. Coming to the other region of our interest, it's the chromosome 11p15 region. This has two conditions, Beckwith and Silver Russell. So far, we saw intellectual disability in mild to severe ratio in Prader-Willi and Angelman. There is no intellectual disability involved in the 11p15 associated conditions, which majorly the growth condition. It's under an overgrowth disorder. So the normal one has both maternal and paternal. This region has two imprinting controlled regions. In the previous example, we had one switch and two disorders. Here, two disorders and two switches and two regions are involved. So IC1 and IC2 are the regions. IC1 has IGF2, that is growth factor, which has to be expressed from the father. IC1 also has a growth regulator H19, which has to be expressed from the mother. Sorry. So anything goes wrong with the paternal copy, what would happen is there is undergrowth, and anything goes wrong with the maternal copy, then we would see overgrowth. So overgrowth disorder is the Beckwith-Widman syndrome, where both the IGF2 are expressing itself. So that is why what happens is at birth itself, the child is as heavy as 3.5 to 4.5 kgs at birth. Organomegalies can be there. It's an overgrowth disorder. But luckily, this is not associated with intellectual disability or developmental delays. Coming to Silver Russell syndrome, this is associated with, it's an undergrowth disorder. At birth, the child could be as low as 1.5 to 2 kgs at birth. And you would see that the face looks little bigger than the body. So this asymmetric appearance would be there. This is also not associated with intellectual disability. There is one more IC2 region. Again, it is complementarily expressed from the father and mother growth. So this leads to tumor suppression and tumor progression. So this is also in the 11p region. So coming to Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, so there are several reasons why Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome can happen. The first one, like I said, it could be the IC1. The growth factor is coming excessively from both paternal and maternal. 5% of the time, this is the case. IC1 maternal gain of methylation has happened. That is why both IGF2 are expressing themselves. Second is IC2 region. In the imprinting control region 2, maternal loss of methylation has happened because of, and this happens in 50% of the cases of Beckwith-Wiedemann cases. And both of this you will be able to diagnose with the help of MSMLPA or MSPCR. Paternal UPD happens, that is uniparental disomy, happens in 20% of cases. Both the chromosomes have come from the father. That means so much of growth related factors are there, and that is why the overgrowth has happened. So that happens in 20% of the cases. 5% of the cases happens because of CDKN1 sequence variants, and 2% of them happens because of some chromosomal changes. It could be translocations, deletions, or insertions in these regions. So there is a clinical scale available with major and minor score for this particular condition. In Beckwith, majorly it's the overgrowth. Like at birth itself, you would see 3.5 or to 4.5 kgs at birth would be there. They could have abdominal issues will be there. Abdominal wall defects can be there. Macroglossia, big tongue can be there. There could be cleft lip and palate and overgrowth. So these are the symptoms that can prompt towards Beckwith. There can be organomegaly, like hepatomegaly can be there, cardiomegaly can be there. And the minor symptoms include they could have they could have hypoglycemia, low sugar. It's very important to manage at this particular time, because low sugar during the neonatal period can also lead to central nervous system insult. So before that happens, we have to take care of the low hypoglycemia very closely. There could be renal issues like Wilms tumors can be there, and there can be polyhydramnios during the pregnancy, that the amniotic fluid is little excessive. Polyhydramnios can be there, and the baby is also a little on the heavier side. So this should prompt the diagnosis towards Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. So the clinical and the genetic diagnosis, like I said, so it can happen because of overgrowth, it can happen because of cleft lip or embryonic tumors or renal tumors. I mean, at the genetic assessment, MS-MLPA for both IC1 and IC2 region, both MLPA and MSPCR can be done. Chromosomal microarray, like I said, it can detect, but it cannot differentiate between CMA and silver. Like it cannot between BWS and silver Russell. Whether it's Beckwith-Wiedemann or it's silver Russell, it won't be able to tell. And 5% of the time, it could be because of CDKN1 sequence variants. Coming to the management aspect, so like I said, there isn't much of developmental delay, but they have to be closely monitored in the first 5 to 7 years of life, because there is high chance of having embryonic tumors, renal tumors, Wilms tumors, hepatoblastoma. There is risk for cancer, so there has to be regular follow up for serum alpha fetoprotein has to be checked for hepatoblastoma. Then ultrasound has to be done for embryonic tumors, and renal ultrasound has to be done for Wilms tumor. So this happens very closely for the first 5 years. Certain cases could have deafness, or they could have cleft lip and palate, or they could have big tongue. So that has to be surgically corrected, or cochlear implant has to be done so that they're able to pick up on speech properly. So that has to be taken care of. And like I said, hypoglycemia has to be managed very well in the neonatal period. If there is hemihypertrophy, where one part of the body looks bigger than the other, sometimes skeletal issues can be there. So for that, consultation and orthopedic management is required. Coming to the fourth condition, Silver-Russell syndrome. So Silver-Russell syndrome is the first imprinting disorder where many chromosomes and many genes are involved. Even within this particular rare disorder, it's very heterogeneous. So 40% of the time, it could happen because of imprinting control region 1, paternal loss of methylation. That means paternal growth factor is missing. Maternal is silenced, paternal is missing. Eventually, you have no growth factor. That is why these children are 1.5 or 2 kgs at birth. Then it could happen because of maternal uniparental disomy of chromosome 7, MEAC gene. In 10% of the cases, this happens, and both of these require methylation-based tests. Then IGF2, CDKN1C, PLAG1, HMGA2 sequence variants could be there in 10% of cases. Rarely it could happen because of maternal UPD11 or ring chromosome 15. So there is an NHS scoring system for diagnosis of Silver-Russell syndrome. One is they are extremely underweight. That could lead to prompt the diagnosis. Next is because of short stature. Even as they grow, they don't grow beyond 3 feet height. They could have prominent head. Because of the smaller body, the head could look a little bigger, and oftentimes it also looks little triangular. Then there could be scoliosis, and cleft lip is also associated in few of them. So whenever you see of these symptoms, it should prompt the diagnosis towards at least testing towards Silver-Russell syndrome. So the diagnosis, the basic investigations, one is for the asymmetrical gestational growth could be one of the reason. The child could be small for gestational age, macrocephaly at birth, and postnatal growth failure. So at postnatal level, when there is growth failure in the first 1 year of life, clinician can get like the symptoms can be confusing between Prader-Willi as well as Silver-Russell. Both have like growth failure in the first few months of life. So if we do a methylation based test, then it will be prominent which condition it is. And coming to the genetic assessment, MSPCR and MSMLPA is required as first line for H19 IGF2 regions. CMA can be done, but again, it will not differentiate between Beckwith and this one. Sequencing has to be done for the 4 genes, and UPD analysis for chromosome 7 has to be done. So coming to the management, again, there is no particular treatment or therapy that is available. It's all symptomatic. They are also at risk of having hypoglycemia. So it has to be managed well in the neonatal period. And it has seen that in India, at least we haven't seen, but in other nations, we have seen that growth hormone therapy has extremely helped, like it has helped them well to attain a height better than that would have happened if without the growth hormone support, because there is deficiency. In only one or two cases we have seen in India also that has been administered, but otherwise mostly it is not, because the Beckwith and Silver Russell are not included in the National Rare Disorder Policy as of now, and there are no support groups also. So it's calls for the fact that we are not diagnosing them enough, we are not recognizing them enough, because these are out there. It's only under recognized. The prevalence part of it we'll be discussing shortly. So this are the management, and they could have issues, skeletal issues. For that they need management, and mostly they do not have intellectual issues, but because of their height and because of their appearance, sometimes they could have psychosocial issues for which they would need counseling, because the image is something that is getting altered. They could see that they are not growing as much as the other children in their family or like their peers, so that can affect them mentally. So it's very important that such support is given to them. So why are we discussing so much about imprinting disorders? So in the last 100 years, there are so many different types of tests that are there. In the at least in 5 decades, so many different types of tests that have come up. From 1800s, we know that genetic association is there, using pedigree, using karyotype, using microarray. So many different conditions we have been able to diagnose. So far, we have 8,000 rare genetic disorders that are there. Despite of having all of this, despite having chromosomal arrays, despite of having sequencing, exome sequencing, genome sequencing, oftentimes about 25% of conditions with abnormal growth, behavior, and intellectual disability go undiagnosed. That means newer mechanisms and newer tests have to be added so that we are able to achieve a optimum diagnosis, because diagnosis is a prime factor in all genetic conditions, because of that only you would be able to plan your management. You will be able to know what is the recurrence risk in the family. So it's important that we are able to at least minimum of a diagnosis, if not therapy for everything, at least diagnosis should be there for all these conditions. And genomic imprinting has a potential to fill in this gap because of their mere appearance, because of the methylation in the DNA, which is not often tested. We tend to miss them in the entire diagnostic uh, algorithms that we do. That is because mostly we send for sequencing or we send for array. Both of them cannot do methylation unless sequencing can detect, but if it has to be bisulfite based, that doesn't happen routinely. So that's how mostly they are missed. Sometimes you would have seen we send for an exome, it has come like a deletion in the 15q, then we think it's Prader-Willi Angelman, then we go and do an MLPA or an MSVCR. So, but these should be the first line of test for these features because they're cost effective and they're rapid, and even sequencing cannot solve them. So this should become the norm. So that's the major reason why we are interested in imprinting disorder. So this is all the reports in the last decade that has come in the Indian publication for imprinting disorders. For Prader-Willi, in Indian Prader-Willi Syndrome Association itself, there are more than 150 families. Despite of that, we don't even have 100 clinical reports in the publication. So the largest one was 34 from Indira Gandhi itself. That was 34 children with Prader-Willi who were on the follow-up and management. That was the highest that is there for imprinting disorder. They have so different groups have used MLPA, MSVCR, fish-based diagnosis. So GH therapy is included in the National Rare Disorder Policy. So financial support is there. Despite of that, in last few years, we have still seen reports where children are dying because of Prader-Willi syndrome. So it's important that we increase the awareness, we increase all the management that it takes so that we are not losing children to conditions which can be managed. So we have seen individuals in certain developed nations, they live up to 70, 80 years despite of having these conditions. But that is not the case, unfortunately, here. That is because we also lack like awareness is there, and then proper management doesn't happen in the country. Coming to Angelman syndrome, with the Indian Angelman Foundation itself, there are more than 80 families who are confirmed to have Angelman. There are 103 families who are registered, and yet in the clinic, in the publications, we see 2 or 3 reports. So that means they're under recognized or under reported. coming to Beckwith Widman, there are more than 15 publications in the last decade, but only one or two of them have actually done the genetic test. One with MSMLPA, one with sequencing. So we can see that they are underreported and under-recognized here. Same goes for Silver Russell. At least for Prader-Willi and Angelman, there is some foundation. There are parents who are proactive, but for the other two, it's important that we generate awareness and we test proactively so that we are able. Because these are conditions where you will be able. First 5 years are very crucial. If you're managing that, then they are as good as any other healthy child. So we are missing the opportunity to do the testing, diagnosis, and proper management. So coming to the prevalence and the pilot study that we did. So we do not have the proper prevalence of any of these conditions in our country. But if we just go by incidence also, if we just go by literature, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000, 1 in 30. So these are the stats that are there. So looking at our population, for any of this given condition, we should have more than 14,000 to 1,50,000 affected individuals for any of these conditions. So put together, we can see more than 5 lakh should be there. But that is not the report. You could see here and there, few clinical reports are there. So there was one study. So during my PhD, I did a study on imprinting disorders at Kamineni Hospital. So these were children who had abnormal growth, behavior, and intellectual disability. We did MSPCR as the first line of testing. With a simple test, we were able to diagnose 30% of them. So 30% of children who had intellectual disability, abnormal growth, behavior, we were able to test with the help of MSPCR and confirm the diagnosis. So that means these are not rare. Like I keep saying, they are just under recognized. On top of that, there are reports that IVF and IVF pregnancies can increase the risk of imprinting disorders 3 to 8 fold. So looking at this, at any given year, we would have more than 25,000 affected individuals for this condition, like cumulatively. So this is the estimate. So this is an estimate. Unless we don't actually go out and test, we wouldn't know how much of this is actually represented. Is it under reported here as well? So, how imprinting disorders can the risk of imprinting disorders can increase with the help of because of assisted reproductive techniques and IVF. So we'll like review two studies which has come out recently. One is from Sweden. So Sweden followed up all their pregnancies from right from 97 till 2017. So there were around 20 lakh or 20 lakh 84,000 pregnancies only in the entire 20 years. Whereas in India, every year we have around 2.5 crores pregnancy. So even in that, so in this 20-year study, they saw that around 1,044 children with imprinting disorders were there, of which 52 belonged to some assisted reproductive technique of IVF. All these factors were there in 52 out of this 1,044 individuals who had Prader-Willi, Angelman, Beckwith, and like all these conditions. Similar study was also done in Sweden and in Japan. In Japan, it was done, and in Japan, around 933 some patients were reported, and in that they have seen that how certain factors during the IVF, certain manipulations during the IVF can increase the risk. They are not claiming that every IVF pregnancy is going to end up with these disorders, but there is certainly an increased risk, about 3 to 8 fold increased risk of having a child with these condition. So why it becomes important is because more and more families are opting towards IVF pregnancies. So far, 186 million people have opted for IVF globally, and more than 10 million children have been born out of that. So this doesn't, like, if you look at individually, it might not increase, but collectively it does increase the risk of imprinting disorders. So what is the role of so what is the role, and at what level can this imprinting can be altered? So to before we get into that, this is some basics of how imprinting marks or methylation marks are established and maintained. So in early primordial germ cells, all the marks are erased. Whatever we have, the marks, they are erased, and later they start getting established. If it's a male child, the establishment in the sperm at birth itself in the germ cell, it is there. But for a female at pubertal level only, all the methylation marks, all the imprint marks are they are established. After fertilization, when they come together, again there is a space where there is pre-implantation maintenance happens, and this is like a cycle: erasure, establishment, and maintenance. So this keeps happening. So that what happens is we get two chromosomes from, like, we get like all the chromosome set we get from the parents. Then when it comes to what our marks get established, and when we pass on to our children newer marks, like we become the parents and those marks are carried on. So that's how this happens. And where is the like IVF plays a role where it can lead to disturbances is IVF or our treatment usually involves ovarian stimulation, gamete collection, in vitro fertilization, embryo culture, and embryo transfer. These are the major steps. So disruption of the monoallelic expression can happen at any of this level, and majorly it happens during abnormal erasure at this particular stage. So there could be an abnormal erasure that is happening, or the maintenance is not happening properly, the re-establishment is not happening properly, which could lead to imprinting disorders. uh, and during the treatments also, high estradiol exposure is given so that the uterine lining is able to take up all the so many after the ovarian like stimulation, the uterine lining is also has to be prepared for the entire treatment, so that can also lead to certain abnormality. So there is so what eventually the group from Japan, what they want to say is ovarian stimulation, culture media used for the gametes, IVF treatment, ICSI manipulation, that is the intracytoplasmic sperm injections, or frozen embryo transfer, all of this together at some level can change the methylation marks that are out there. Like I said, this doesn't happen all the time, but there is a risk that this could happen, and we have to be like we should exercise caution, and we should also be vigilant. Like we should, whenever we see a child which has obesity or has a mild intellectual disability, it should prompt towards the diagnosis of imprinting disorders. So this is the hazard ratio that they have given for the three. So for Angelman, they did not see much of the association in this particular study, but for other, they could see fourfold, threefold. Like this is the ratio that they were able to see. Yeah, so it was more pronounced for Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome than for Prader-Willi and Silver-Russell syndrome. So parental background factors like infertility or advanced maternal age, advanced paternal age, even if you keep that aside, for Beckwith-Wiedemann, the risk got attenuated, but for Prader-Willi, it did not. So it continued to remain the same. ICSI treatment along with the frozen embryo transfer also increased the risk for Prader-Willi and Silver-Russell cases as compared to for Beckwith-Wiedemann. So ICSI therapy was associated with a threefold elevated risk for Prader-Willi and Silver-Russell cases. Frequency of art considered Beckwith-Wiedemann and Silver-Russell cases were nearly tenfold as compared to the anticipated. And they were also able to see in the Beckwith and Silver-Russell cases, in addition to your 11p15 region, other imprinted region were also getting disturbed. So that led to multiple loci imprinting disturbances. So this is also something that we do not investigate in our country, and that is something that should change. So this is the overall different types of genetic mutations that they were able to see, and they were majorly it was a DNA methylation error. So to understand, they did another study for in Silver Russell embryos, and then they wanted to see what is the difference that is happening, how this methylation is getting disturbed. So the major finding from that study was the differential methylated variants tended to be more frequently methylated than methylated. So this is happening at the sperm level, which were getting disturbed. This did not happen much at the maternal level because this is a case of Silver Russell. So it's majorly the paternal disturbance that is happening. So they could see methylation marks were majorly disturbed in the paternal copy, but in the maternal copy, it did not happen as much. So they were able to conclude during the fertilization rather than at the gamete, these problems would have arisen. And that is why they would want to say, like, like artificial reproductive techniques may have prevented proper erasure, establishment, and maintenance of DNA methylation. So with this, I would like to introduce what type of work for imprinting disorders we do at our center, at Tata Institute for Genetics and Society. So we have developed an assay for methylation-specific polymerase chain reaction for all four conditions, and which can be done below 8 hours. Like in a 2-day protocol, you'll be able to do the diagnosis. And it's a simple technique that I would like to take you through the process. From the blood, DNA isolation has to be done. A bisulfite conversion is done. These are all simple tests, simple techniques which can be done easily in a simple thermal cycler. You don't even require RT-PCR equipment for this. So a DNA isolation, bisulfite conversion, followed by PCR and gel electrophoresis. It's a very simple technique and multiplex. So in the same assay, you would be same gel, you will be able to see both maternal and paternal. Which one in a healthy individual, both copies should be there. But in an affected, you would see the subsequent copy is missing. So we have also clinically validated for about 45 patients, like patients who were tested by MSMLPA confirmed. So those also we have run through this assay, and this assay works fine. So this is for Prader-Willi and Angelman. Like I said, healthy individual will have both. Angelman will have only the paternal. Prader-Willi only will have the maternal. So that's how the complementary diagnosis can happen. So for Beckwith-Wiedemann, we require IC1 and IC2. For Silver-Russell, we require majorly IC1 and MEST. MEST gene is an indicator towards uniparental disomy of chromosome 7. So they are run on the gel electrophoresis. It's a very simple technique and a rapid technique. And like I said, we have done it for 45 individuals. So yeah. So currently MSMLPA is widely used. Of course, it's a sensitive technique. It tells you about also whether it's a UPD case, it's a deletion case. But when compared to our test, what are the advantages we would like to say? First is we intend to make it as a first line testing. Any lab which doesn't have a capillary electrophoresis has only a simple PCR machine will also be able to do, and it's a rapid technique. So isolation is required in all the process. Bisulfite conversion requires in MSPCR, but it's not required in MLPA. But MLPA requires digestion, but MSPCR doesn't. So if you see, it's easier to do an MSPCR as compared to an MLPA. Infrastructure interoperability is simpler for MSPCR because you only require a thermal cycler and an electrophoresis. Molecular subtypes, it cannot differentiate. It can tell you it's Prader-Willi, it's Angelman with 99% sensitivity, but it won't be able to tell UPD or deletion. But sometimes telling that will also prevent further exome sequencing or array, because the clinician knows, okay, this is a Prader-Willi, then this is the management. If required, they could do an MLPA to know the subtype. So this is intended to be a first line test. It can do for all the 4 conditions. Currently, we do not have an MSPCR for Beckwith or Silver-Russell. It's only MSMLPA, which is available in only few labs. So, but this particular assay can do for all 4 conditions, and the cost is something that we are working on, and we would want it to be below 500 per reaction, so that even a simple molecular biology labs will be able to adopt it. Moving on to other things, what we work on imprinting disorder. Like I said, we keep talking about the 4 imprinting disorder, but in literature there are 13 to 14 types of them. We do not investigate them enough, we do not report them enough, we do not see like Temple syndrome and all are not, because if these 4 are happening, there is all chances that the other 8 are also happening. It's only that we are under diagnosing or under testing them. So there are so many regions that has to be tested. There are 200 genes which are imprinted that has to be tested, which is not getting tested in the routine practice. So our idea was, can we develop one assay which can do all of these imprinted disorder in a single go? We had another need also in mind, because there are no targeted therapy available. It's all symptom based management, and several times it's medications with which the mood stabilizer is given, or seizure is managed. Also for sleepiness, medications are given. So oftentimes, like I said, in Prader-Willi and Angelman, the risk of adverse drug reactions is very huge. And because there is polypharmacy, there is several medicines coming together, there is high risk of adverse drug reactions also. So when we look at a Prader-Willi syndrome, you could see all these features out there, all these symptoms out there. But when you look at it closely, only these belong to the syndrome. These are all because of adverse drug reaction of the several drugs that they are taking. So we could do pharmacogenomics, which could prevent these adverse drug reactions, so that at least near normal life the child is able to get. Same goes for Angelman syndrome. Majorly, they have given behavioral drugs and anti-seizure medication, which could have high adverse drug reaction. So similar analysis we did for this, and we saw these are the symptoms associated with the disorder, and these are the ones which could be prevented because they are adverse drug reactions. So if we are able to understand what is causing this, and if we are able to understand what type of medication which patient will respond, then we could have optimal healthcare outcomes for this. Because we do not have targeted therapy, it's very important that we also take care how the quality of life is there and how much they are able to adjust with these medication. So overall, it's a two-step process, a two-phase thing that we do at TICS. One is we have developed MSPCR based assay, which is getting converted to kits. Like currently, if any lab is interested to collaborate or any clinician is interested, we are happy to work with you. So one is we have developed MSPCR assay. Second is we are using long read sequencing platform using Oxford Nanopore. We are targeting all the imprinted regions in one go, and then we are also checking for pharmacogenomics marker for these of the drugs that are being given in Prader-Willi and Angelman, so that the clinician has an idea. It's Prader-Willi, it's the deletion type. These are going to be the symptoms that are there, and these are the medications that might that the child would respond in a better way. So that's how we have like our current work is going on for imprinting disorder in the lab. Yeah, thanks. So these are my team members, and these are our clinical collaborators. So we also work with the Indian Prader-Willi Syndrome Association and Angelman Foundation, and these are the funding. So I work at TICS. There is Tata Trust, and we also have a DST Inspire grant to do the research work. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take.
A great presentation, Dr. Gayatri. Like you explained the genomic imprinting, which was a very
I think there is
difficult disease to discuss. You have explained it in a very nice manner. Any questions from the audience? Like there is one question on address and contact number. Please, how to send the sample and cost. Can you answer this, Gayatri?
Yeah, I'll share my email address. You could write to me. Yeah. Are you able to see? This is my email address.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Actually, like MSPCR is a very cost-effective test for diagnosis of genomic imprinting disorders like these four which were described by Dr. Gayatri. If there are no questions, we can wind up this program.
yeah, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity for me to moderate this session. It was a really interesting discussion.
Thank you once again for this opportunity.